Welcome to another edition of Inspired Stories, where leaders share their experiences so we can learn from their successes, how they've overcome adversity, and explore current challenges they're facing.
Welcome to another edition of the Inspired Stories podcast, where leaders share their experiences so we can learn from their successes and be inspired by how they've overcome adversity. My name is Anthony Codaspoti, and today's guest is Michael Darby, co-owner of Nurses Direct, a family-owned business that provides nursing services directly to healthcare facilities in the state of Louisiana. In fact, they were one of the first nurse staffing agencies in Louisiana. They staff hospitals, at-home private duty locations, and other healthcare facilities with nurses who provide a high quality of patient care. Their mission is to provide staffing services in a manner that is tailored to the needs of each client, and to do so in a manner that is personal, courteous, and professional. You can find their website at nursesdirect.us. Now, before we get into all that good stuff, today's episode is brought to you by my company, Add Back Benefits Agency, where we offer very specific and unique employee benefits that are both great for your team and fiscally optimized for your bottom line. One recent client was able to add over $900 per employee per year in extra cash flow by implementing one of our programs. Results vary for each company, and some organizations may not be eligible. To find out if your company qualifies, contact us today at addbackbenefitsagency.com. Now, back to our guest today, the co-owner of Nurses Direct, Michael Darby. I appreciate you making the time to share your story today.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me.
So let's go to the origin. How did Nurses Direct first get started? I see that you're an RN. Did that happen well in advance of starting the company, or sort of in conjunction with?
Well, no, that actually happened well in advance. I kind of started at the bottom. I worked my way up. I was what they call an LPN, a licensed practical nurse. My mom was a nurse for 40-something years. Kind of inspired me. I just love helping people and caring for people. And the medicine interests me a lot. So I went in and I obtained my LPN at a technical school in Opelousas, Louisiana. And then from there, I worked at a local hospital in this little town of Opelousas, Louisiana. And then they helped and paid for my schooling for me to go back to school. I'd work every weekend. And then I received my my registered nurse's degree from LSU in Eunice. I received my associate's degree from there. And then from there, I went back and took other classes to pursue my bachelor's. And then I opened a nursing agency. But that was about 12 years after starting my nursing career.
So 12 years after you started your nursing career is when you started your staffing agency. And was that Nurses Direct, or was there one that came before it?
The one before it was called Nurse Corps, CORPS, Nurse Corps, kind of like Marine Corps. And our vision was like, the last to know, the first to go. And, they'd call us whenever they needed someone in the middle of the night. So, but the problem with that was the name kind of threw us for a curve, because they would say Nurse Corps instead of Corps. And I said, well, I don't know if that goes over too well.
That's sending the wrong message in your marketing.
Agree. We did well with that. And, but anyhow, and here we are today, Nurses Direct. So when did Nurses Direct get started? What year was that? Almost 9 years now. So I don't know that I'd have to look on the Secretary of State, but about 9 years ago. And prior to that, we had Nurse Corps. That was around 2000. In 1999, 2000 was the concept. And we started from there. So
why in 2000 get started in nurse staffing? What did you see that made you think there's an opportunity, there's an unfilled need here?
Well, my business partner, Mark Savoy, he's a nurse also. He's like 12, 13 years older than I am. It's kind of an ironic story. I'll just give it to you in the short version. My grandfather is still living. He's 98 years old. Mark Savoy, my business partner that I'm in business with today, his stepfather was a barber. And he and my grandfather went to school together. So every time I would go to bring my elderly grandfather to get a haircut 2 or 3 times, Mr. Bim, which was Mark Savoy's stepfather, would say, my stepson's in a nursing agency. You need to speak to him. And me, I was like, no, I hadn't worked my way up at the hospital. I was a department head. I had a Monday through Friday job. I lived 2 blocks from the hospital. I'd walk to work. I mean, I loved it. and I was salaried. So I said, I was thinking from the concept of working agency, going work supplemental shifts. Well, about the second or third time I go, uh, he happened to call his stepson, and Mark shows up. He said, "Well, how would you like to own your own nursing agency?" I said, "Well, okay. How much of an investment would that be?" He said, "Nothing. I will float the payroll. I'll help you do, whatever money it costs. I just need you to get out there and recruit facilities and nurses for me so that we can staff." And he had been in the industry quite some time by then. And I mean, it was known there was a nursing shortage. This was back, like I say, in the late 90s. I said, "Well, yeah, there seems like there's a need for that." And so I gave it a try. And, 4 or 5 months later, I was making more money doing staffing. But I mean, like, I was hustling every day. And after, I think, almost 18 months or so, I was able to quit my job as a department head and pursue this full time.
So Mark had a background in nurse staffing. Maybe he had
Yes.
his own company before, or he had one
Yes.
at the time,
Yes.
and
Yes.
he needed some help. He knew how
Yeah.
to
He
run
was
the
just,
business side of things, but he's like, you seem like a good personality, a guy who can do sales, go out and hustle, find us some more clients, find us some more nurses. Is that kind of what the thought process was?
that's what happened. Yes. Yes. He was looking for people to help get more business and, get market and drum up more business. And he always wanted nurses, and he only wanted registered nurses. He wanted that level of professionalism. And so he'd always try to get a registered nurse to help market, and a native nurse in that specific area to get started. That
Okay.
was his concept. That was his model.
So you were a nurse. You'd been a nurse for several years. You'd gone through that education. You had worked your way up to department head. Obviously, you knew that world pretty well. Now you're stepping into a related world, but a different one, and in a very different role in sales. Did you feel well equipped going into that, or did you feel like you were kind of fumbling your way through the dark?
Well, I'll say this. Ever since my teenage years, probably around 13, 14 years old, I've always inspired to be an entrepreneur. I went into the medical field because my mother was a nurse. I went into nursing, and I knew that I would have job security. I would have something that was stable to fall back on. A lot of my friends, especially being from South Louisiana, went into the oil field or engineering or stuff like that. And I knew that was cyclical depending on who was in the White House.
What the
So
price of oil is doing? Yeah.
that's exactly right. And I'd see it all the time. It was the ebbs and flows. I said, "Well, we don't live in a third world country. We have the greatest healthcare in the world. They're going to make people, if they're sick, they'll spend their last penny to go in the hospital and seek healthcare." I said, "That's a stable field to go into." So I went into that. But I've always, look, at the time, I had a lawn care service. I was cutting the grass for the hospitals and the nursing homes where I would work and supervise at. I had contracts with them on that. But one of the things Mark Savoy told me, he said, "You cannot go cut grass in Peoria, Illinois." He said, "But you could staff nurses there." I said, "Okay, that kind of makes sense." He said, "That's very labor intensive what you're doing." So he's taught me a lot about business, and he mentored me over the years.
Okay, so he brings you in as a partner. He's like, "Hey, I'll front the payroll. I've got my role here. You've got your role. Tell me
Mhm.
about how you sold that first client."
Well, it wasn't easy. The first client that I got was the first shift I ever staffed was at a hospital that I was working at, but it was a facility, an entity that leased space in the hospital. They weren't owned by the hospital. They were called an LTAC, a long-term acute care. And what they would do, they would lease space in the hospital, so many beds for rehab patients. So that was my first shift. I um I figured that was the easiest thing for me to get into because the hospital didn't look at me. They looked at me as an employee. Administration looked at me as a registered nurse, as a department head. They didn't look at me as, oh, a businessman and you're going to come in and supplemental staff us. You're a nurse yourself with no business experience. So I was able to get into this entity, to this facility, and it was called Louisiana Healthcare Group. And now I've been staffing them 20 something years now. And Ironically, whenever they first started, they were a small company, but they just sold for 5.4 billion. And
Wow.
yeah, a good friend of mine, Keith Mars, Louisiana Healthcare Group, they sold out to the biggest hospital system, Optum and United Healthcare. So yeah, and I was able to follow them around and done a lot of work with them over the years.
And is your service still focused in the state of Louisiana, or are you providing staffing outside of there?
During COVID, I think we expanded out to like 24 states. And now we're in like, I think we just went back in 19 or 20. I'd have to look it. It's we do contract work sometimes and another, work. So in different states we have different footprints, but our concentration's more so the South, Louisiana, Mississippi, Texas is where the majority of our work's at. But I mean, we've gone all the way to Wyoming and I don't know where, Delaware, New Jersey. I mean, it just depends wherever the need's at.
So I'm curious on the staffing side of things, why do you think your contract employees prefer working through you versus getting a full-time job at the same place or somewhere else?
Great question. Nursing's a female dominated field. And a lot of times and then it also has to do with the younger nurses, generation of nurses. They don't want that to be locked down. They want to be able to, let's say, go to their kid's soccer game, or maybe their husband has a really good job and they don't need the benefits. They want the flexibility of being able to pick and choose when they work, how often they work, and where they work sometimes. And not all of them, but especially some of the younger nurses, I'm realizing. See, whenever I got out of school, I wanted that stability. I wanted to go to one facility, climb the ladder, build relationships there. That's just how I was. I wanted the stability. But like I say, and I'm not trying to be gender specific here, but I mean, women sometimes, a lot of times we'll see their husbands have really good jobs, they own their insurance, and they have the flexibility, and they also a lot of times are taking care of the children and stuff, and not always, but sometimes. And we also see a lot of single mothers that are nurses, and they want the flexibility also to be able to work when they can. They can work lots of days in a row, make enough money, then take off and make their schedule as they see fit.
And so how does that work from a scheduling perspective on the client side, right? Because I would think that they would want sort of that stable staffing, right? But if your contract workers are getting flexibility by working for you instead of the hospital, how are you kind of filling in the gaps when they don't want to work?
Well, that's another good question. Our facilities, they do like what we call the continuity, the same nurse, same facility, same unit. And that does happen a lot. And what they'll do is after years of developing rapport and developing relationships with the nurse and the facilities, they'll build a pool with us of, let's say, 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 nurses that they really like, and they try to continue to schedule those same nurses, actually asking for them by name, or sometimes circumventing us and texting them directly, which I don't like, but it's hard to prevent us because we have to make sure that we keep up with everything and we make sure everything is confirmed. But I have nurses that have been working for me for 15 years, some of them since I started, and some of them still work at the same facilities that they were working at back then, just in working through us through supplemental staffing, because they've developed that relationship. I mean, they're like staff now at the facilities, and it works out. It works out sometimes, and sometimes it don't. But especially in the hospital systems, maybe not so much in the long-term care facilities or what we call nursing homes, the census fluctuates a lot. And insurance has changed so much over the years. 30, 40 years ago, you go in for an appendectomy, get your appendix taken out, you might stay in the hospital a week. Now you go in the morning, you're gone before lunch. So the staff has to also follow that. So when the census is up, it's a direct correlation. They need the nurses, but they don't need to keep that par level and benefit full-time nurses at all times. And what gives us the capability to do it better than the hospitals, if they have a freestanding brick and mortar hospital, and that's all they have in that area, they might not own any other facilities. they cannot flex these nurses and send them to facilities across the street or across town, whereas we can do that. What happens with them, if their census drops and they're not as busy, well, those nurses are going elsewhere and looking for work. I'm able to give it to them if I develop a base and have enough nurses and enough facilities in one given area to stay stable, if that
Well,
makes
and I
sense.
think you've just answered my next question, which is why do the hospitals want to contract through Nurses Direct instead of hiring these folks themselves? And I think the big thing I just heard you say is they need that flexibility. Like there are times when they've got more patients in there, they need more coverage. There are times when things are slow, they need less coverage. And it's harder to do that when they've got their own full-time employees there. It's a lot easier to have that flexibility with Nurses Direct because you've got multiple hospitals in the area that you can send people to or pull them from when that need rises or falls, right?
Correct. In a nutshell, yes. I mean, there's a lot more to it, but yeah, exactly. That's the concept. Yes. And
Are
of
there
course,
other benefits for a hospital using Nurses Direct versus hiring their own full-time employees?
well, I mean, they don't have they don't have to manage as many people. They don't have to pay as many benefits. And I believe, like I said, if they hire their employees directly and something happens, you know, to where they don't have the need for them, or if they have them on full time, then they'd have to guarantee them those hours. And here's another thing. Many a times the hospital systems, and I've seen it over the years, over 20 some years of staffing, they'll try to do their own in-house pool of agency. Same thing happens though. They can't keep them busy enough. And like I always tell the hospital is they're not in the recruiting staffing business. They're in the patient. They're in the business of taking care of patients. Bottom line, that is what they do. They're in the medical, medical field of taking, medically taking care of people. They're not in the HR recruiting, staffing, supplemental staffing business and managing. And some of the best bedside nurses, they're most senior nurses in the facility. They're sitting behind a desk trying to get staff instead of at the bedside where they really, so that they see the benefits long term. And like I say, they can work through us and in one call or one text message. And with technology nowadays, we've pretty much eliminated phone calls. Well, I mean, where with the apps and the programs that we have, they just shoot us over the needs when we put them in our staffing program, and it goes straight to them, and they know who's coming in, when, where, what, how. And that's the reason why I called it Nurses Direct. I still haven't tweaked it exactly the way I wanted, but I'm getting there.
Still haven't tweaked the name the way that you want it, or
No, the concept of what I want to do. Nurses Direct's concept always was using the technology and platform with the geofencing, so I'd know when they're going to be at the hospital, when they leave for time and attendance, and eliminating a lot of the labor intensive processes of it.
And is that something still being worked on, that tech that you're describing?
Yes, and I don't know. I mean, I can't implement it everywhere as I'm at, because especially in Louisiana and some of the places we staff, being really rural areas, we don't have the bandwidth some places to be able to do that. My concept was, whenever geofencing came out and the technology came out, is I can have a geofence around my facility, and I would know if a nurse, by having their push notifications open on their app, if they wouldn't get there in time, I can redirect it to the other nurses in the area to let them know that they wouldn't be there, and also to the facility for call-ins or stuff like that. But a lot of times in the rural areas, we don't have the bandwidth for them to even punch in and out. Or some of my nurses, if I some of them, especially some of the nursing assistants, they don't their phones won't allow them to do certain things, apps, or they don't have media on their phones, so, or the older ones. So you always run into bumps in the road, but that's kind of the route I was taking. I mean, we're getting there, and I mean the system is so much better than whenever I first started. I had a 3-ring binder and Razor phones that I was trying to keep charged, flip phones.
So what stage is that tech in now? Is it sort of like kind of sitting on the shelf because of some of the challenges that you described with flip phones and lack of bandwidth, or are you actively working on it and tend to roll it out in the areas that you can?
Well, we're always improving our technology. We use texting apps, we use staffing apps that'll allow the nurses to see where all our needs at in any given area. We can push out messages to nurses in any given area, query it however we want. They can pick up shifts. The hospitals can accept the shifts, then we confirm them all within clicks on the phone with no calls or labor intensive processes, all through apps and the different things that we use. So no, we're there. I mean, we're there. I'd always like to improve it and make it better. But like I said, in some areas, it'll never be. I mean, you know, they're never going to go somewhere in the middle of nowhere's a little nursing home that might be a population of 300 people, you know, a little village or something. We're not going to get there with that.
Right. I want to go back to something that you said earlier, because it kind of clicked something in my head, sort of this idea of like hospitals are not HR and staffing companies. They're in the business of taking care of sick and injured people. So, I mean, much in the same way that they would go out and hire, say, like a marketing firm, you know, if they wanted to do some marketing, because that's not, I mean, they could hire marketing people in-house, right? But you're not going to get that same level of broad expertise that you would get if you hired a firm who specializes in that. And it's a similar kind of thing with you guys. Like what you do all day, every day is you recruit and retain great nurses and know how to move them in and out of different places as the demand warrants. And that's just not something that the hospitals are set up to do as well as you are.
Correct. That is not their goal. You know, yes. I mean, they try really hard, but I mean, their bottom line is, like you say, take care of a patient in the bed and making that, yes.
So by using Nurses Direct, they're able to focus more on their core competencies. Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm curious to hear a little bit more about what makes you guys special in the industry. Clearly, you're not the only company that provides nurse staffing. What is it that Nurses Direct does that is special or different?
Well, we're all nurses here that have founded the company, and family, nurses and family. My wife is a school teacher, but she's given up her career to work for us full time. Mark's wife, my business partner, Mark Sabah, his wife's a registered nurse also. She works here with us. So we know from actually doing the job, working agency, Darla's worked agency, Mark's worked agency, I've worked agency. So we were on the other side. We were the ones being recruited and marketed and trying to, get to retain us to go out and work at facilities. So we have firsthand experience before even coming into the staffing on the other side of the fence. So we really care, and we have our own stories, and we know the industry pretty well. I'll say, I've been doing it my whole career, and so has Mark, and so has Darla. So I think that's kind of what sets us above everyone else, and especially in this region in South Louisiana, what we kind of call Cajun country. Here is where we're located. It's such a unique area in Louisiana, and so much culture. Everybody feels like family. So I think we have a really good connection here from where our base started, and we try to treat everybody like, I look at each and every nurse. My concept is always one nurse at a time. I want to develop a relationship with the nurse, find out exactly what they need and what they want and what their likes and what their tendencies are, and give us the feedback. And then we want to try to find them the best possible work environment that we can give them. That's what we do. And I'd rather have one quality nurse than 10 of them that I don't really know. And, as it's grown, I'm not physically capable of doing it anymore. I used to know all of my nurses. Now we have databases of thousands of nurses, and I still try, and they'll always get me. Look, you need to call this one. I called 2 of them today. There were issues and problems, and I still like talking to them because I can feel and empathize and understand the stress that they're under. Working in a hospital environment or in the environment as a nurse, it's very stressful sometimes. And so we want to just try to help them along their way and pay them well and treat them fair.
Well, I think you hit on a great point there. The fact that your partner, and his wife, who's also a partner, all have background in these roles. And so when you're talking to the nurses, when you're talking to the hospitals, you're not talking as somebody who's unfamiliar or uneducated about what the environment is like. You know, you've been there. You've gotten your fingers dirty. You've had your sleeves rolled up.
Yes. Oh yeah, absolutely. You know, and I can give you an example. Whenever I first started, I had mentioned I only lived a couple of blocks from the hospital that I worked at before I opened my nursing agency. Well, I had a nurse one time, drove about an hour to come to work. It's in Baton Rouge, drove to Opelousas. For some reason, calls me whenever he gets in the parking lot and says, you know, I really don't feel like going to work today. I think I'm gonna just call off. And I'm all like, they're asking for like 4 or 5 more nurses. Please don't do this to me. Well, I had to call the director of nurses at the time, and we came up the ladder together. But she was the head of the hospital, and she was there working because their census was so high, and it was a weekend, and they didn't have anybody. So whenever I called her to let her know that I won't mention the nurse's name, wouldn't be coming in, she said, "Why don't you put on your lab coat and come on over here?" And I sure did.
Oh, right.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've done that. You know, I did whatever it took physically. If I was able to do it, I would go. I'd work shifts and develop that rapport and with the facilities and so they know they can count on us. You know, so yeah, I've done that multiple times.
So we talked about how you got that first client. I'm curious how you recruited that first nurse. I'm guessing technology is way different today, and the processes that you're using at this scale have changed dramatically. But how about that first one?
Okay, well, I'll tell you what I did. I kind of cheated a little bit here, I guess you can say. Um, I was working in the hospital where I was working at, and other agencies were staffing, you know, in the facility. So I was actually the head of a hyperbarics wound care unit, and we bring around a little digital camera to take pictures of the wound care, the wound patients and stuff. Well, I'd see the other agency nurses in there because they don't allow them to wear the agency badges anymore, but they had the little name tags and with the agency. So I would approach them, say, listen, I'm trying to, and I'd take their picture with the same digital camera I was using to make them a little badge. And then next day they were working for me somewhere else or wherever. So that's how I recruited them because I was in there. I was already in there. So I
And
started
so, what
out
was
with
the sales pitch? What they've got a job now? Why switch?
well, I mean, I just had to sell them on it and tell them, you know, that I was a nurse because I guess they didn't see the agency people there, and they were far off. They wasn't local. So I tell them,
Mhm.
look, I'm gonna treat you good, and I try to pay them a little more, or whatever I had to do to convince them. And I tell them, look, I'll give you the preference on the shifts, and I tell them which facilities I have, where you like to work at. I say, oh, look, I have that facility. You want to come work over there? I'll give you the day shifts or whatever shifts you want. Come work for me, and I'll pay you every day. I'll pay them daily as they wasn't getting paid as often. I even implemented something years and years ago where I had a little payroll card and I would transfer the money from this card to that card. It was like a prepaid credit card. And I would load this card and then transfer their money while they were walking to their car. I'd put their money on their card. So they were paid instantly. They liked that. Anything I had to do to get them to start with me. And then I developed relationships with them. I tried everything.
Yeah, this is a question that I love to ask all my guests. I've heard certain industries the labor market is softening a little bit, but still tight. And I'm going to guess it's still pretty tight in the nursing world. Is that correct?
Yes, I mean there's still a very big need for nurses. I mean, look, whenever COVID hit, we've never experienced anything like that before. It was it was really it was hard. It was bad. Not only that, I mean it affected our industry directly. Nurses were scared. They wanted, I mean, look, we had nurses, we had to pay a lot. I mean, it was lot. I mean, the cost went up 50% or more in some areas. You know, it's coming back down now for different reasons, and I like to do a lot of research and monitor. But you know, the burnout rate is very, very high with nurses, especially nurses working at the bedside. So a lot of them are trying to get into different fields or get into doctors' offices or something. So what we do specifically, staffing at the bedside and in the hospital systems, acute care, the burnout rate's pretty high.
Is there anything that you can do to help alleviate that?
We're trying. I'm working with the in Louisiana specifically. I work very closely with our legislatures our representatives in passing bills to get more nursing schools, more nursing instructors. Um, I try to work with the facilities to direct recruit for them. We even do headhunting to hire directly for them to fill their needs, because I'm not always going to be able to just fill all of their needs. And actually, I tend to kind of stay away from facilities that some facilities I'll start staffing and I'm noticing, whoa, every nurse in there is my nurse. I mean, that's not good. I mean, I've had that happen before, especially during
Is that not
COVID.
part of the contract that they can't hire the
No.
contract?
What I'm talking about, the whole, like every nurse that was working,
They are working for you, and so they're relying fully on you.
pretty much, yes. I mean, like it's some of the nursing homes, especially during COVID and stuff, all the nurses were quitting because opportunities were elsewhere's. And so it's like, okay, we have 5 or 6 nurses and nursing assistants. And I'd ask them, because back then they'd sign slips, paper slips, or now it's digital. And I'm all like, why is one of my nurses verifying your time? They said, well, Mr. Mike, there's nobody else in here but our nurses. I said, whoa, hold on. That's scary to me, because I know there's really no continuity there. And it's worrisome to me. So I would rather a facility be stable. Your nurses don't want to work at places like that are chaos.
Yeah.
You have it, like you were saying, they have a different nurse, different day. I'd rather help them build their staff up to where they have good staff. It's easier for me to staff their supplemental staffing than if they have a good base. So I realize that.
Without giving away any secret sauce, I'm curious what you guys do to be so successful, first in recruiting good nurses and then retaining them to where they don't want to go and work for one of your competitors or leave and go to a hospital directly. What are some things that you've tried in that recruiting and retention space that have worked for you?
Well, everybody's unique, and individuals are different, and every nurse is different. But I'll tell you the things over the years we've worked at. Whereas before we used to run ads on like the typical Indeed or Glassdoor stuff, social media is a big platform now. Getting on a lot of these blogs and finding the nurses there and developing relationships with them. I always tell my recruiters and my staff, anytime they are talking to a nurse and trying to recruit a nurse, always find out as much information on them as possible. The better we know our nurses, the better we are able to serve them and help them find what they need. So one of my biggest things is, whenever we're on the phone with somebody, don't ever explain something away. What's the problem? How can we fix it? I want to help you, and develop the relationship. Find out about their children and what they like and everything. So I think we try to get a really personal relationship with our nurses, and I like to be transparent with them also. I'm like, we have to stay in business, but I'm gonna try to pay my nurses as much as I can and make my profits to stay in business, and they see that. So where they won't try to go for a temporary other nursing agency. Oh, I'm gonna pay you another couple dollars an hour. Well, yeah, but it's gonna be temporary, because eventually the facility, they're gonna have to go up on their rates at the same facility, and the profit margins will be different. So they're gonna get that it's the carrot and stick. There's gonna be no longevity there. And they see, hey, if we stick with Nurses Direct, they're going to treat us right. They're going to give us preference on the shifts, and they're going to fight for us and try to get the availabilities for us, and develop also the relationship with the department managers and the heads in the facilities is another thing. So we have to kind of, on both sides, have that relationship. And whenever I first started, I would go out and meet and greet, but now we try to do Zoom calls with our facilities and talk to them and see what we can do better, and with quality control.
Do most of your nurses tend to work in the same geographical area, or do they like to kind of move around? Like, oh, I want a vacation in Atlanta. Like, I'm going to go work there for a few months.
I used to do some travel nursing years and years ago. We kind of tend to steer away from that now. I don't like to send nurses across the country, and there are agencies that do just that. We're not heavily weighted on traveling nurses across the country. What I like to do is recruit in a specific area and build a pool of facilities in that area and a pool of nurses in that area. Now, some of them will drive, and we can stipend them if they drive more than like 60, 65 miles or whatever. We give them allowances for housing and food and stuff like that. But as far as I have in the past, but it's more labor intensive. I would send nurses from, say, Louisiana to St. George, Utah, staff nurses in Hawaii, staff nurses all up and down the coast, all over. But now I find that the way I lay, my business model is to recruit in an individual area and spread from those pods.
Yeah, it sounds like there would be economies of scale from your model, right? You don't just have one hospital, and you don't just have like 3 nurses. You've got several hospital outfits, and you've got dozens or hundreds, I don't know, of nurses in that same geography. So it's easier to move people in and out of shifts as demand changes.
That's what works best for us, and that was trial and error. We learned, and we all like, and this is the model that worked best for us, and that's what I choose. That's how I choose to do it. Yeah.
What are future growth plans look like for Nurses Direct?
Well, we're definitely growing. I can see us going, pretty much in any state we want to in the next couple of years. We're working with a lot more what we call vendor management systems, to where we're getting into bigger hospital systems in bigger areas. I can, year by year, but now COVID was an outlier. But I can see, we're growing year in and year out, 10, 15. During COVID, I was growing 10% a month sometimes. It was so hard to keep. Oh, it was so hard to keep up. The volume was ridiculous. I had to give up my desk. I had to give up my office. My business partner had to give up his desk and his office. We had to hire so many human resource and onboarders, and yeah, it was craziness.
Sounds pretty intense.
It was. But the good thing about it, the end result, we developed a lot of relationships with nurses and facilities. So it all worked out in the end. But we were working some 18, 20-hour days every day.
Well, on behalf of everybody who is on the receiving end of those nursing services, thank you to you and your nurses for what you did during that crazy time. Everybody was scared, and nurses in particular, because they were on the front line of it all. So hats off to you guys.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you.
So I'm curious, as you go into a new state, is that a big lift? Is there like new licensing rules in each place you go? Yeah.
Every state's different. Some states require a license in the state. Other states just require us to be licensed, and follow certain criteria. But each state is different. Some of the more difficult states may be, for instance, California has a lot of regulations, New York. But pretty much every state's different. And I have legal on staff. I have actually Matt that you saw earlier. He has his Juris Doctor, and so he kind of evaluates all of the stuff for us, and he does a little bit of everything, and he's great with IT. So Matt helps out a lot with that.
Yeah, Matt was helpful in getting us all set up and resolving some tech issues here before the interview. So he's wearing many hats as well himself. Yeah. Michael, what are some of the most common mistakes that you see hospitals making when staffing their facilities?
One of the biggest mistakes I see with staffing, especially supplemental staffing, I'd like to focus in on that, is the agency nurses are there to help meet a need. And lots of times they know that the agency nurses are better compensated than they are. And there's some animosity sometimes. And the way I look at it is treat them fair, try to. And I try to, I don't like to get involved on that end because that's not my position, but I talk to the department heads, especially whenever one of my nurses I know are getting not getting fairly treated, they'll give them the harder assignments. They'll, just not communicate with them, not show them the little ins and outs, because every place is different. Where this is located, where that's, and it's like we try to do the best we can with orientation. And the longer that I do staff the facilities, the more capable we are at educating the nurses prior to them working there. And you know, every facility is different, but some of them will allow us to send our nurse for, you know, like a scaled down version of an orientation, maybe 8 hours or for, you know, 4 hours or something like that. But they usually don't get as much as a full-time employee would have, because they want them to come in and function right away. So I think one of the biggest mistakes that I think it happens, and it happens on the staffing side, is them not treating the nurses the same as their full-time staff. And whenever that happens, I tend to pull back and, you know, like, no, it's not a really good place. And the nurses know, oh, I'm not going to work over there. And they know.
Okay. Nobody needs that. That's not helpful for business. That's not helpful for your nurses.
Yeah.
I want to shift gears on you now, Michael. Curious to hear about a serious challenge that you had to overcome, either personally or professionally, and maybe some lessons that you learned coming through that.
Wow, this one really gets to me here. In January 1st of 2004, I was doing both. I was working agency and I was still kind of picking up at the facility where I was at, just PRN as needed. So I was still kind of working as a nurse and running my nursing agency while I was involved in a motorcycle wreck. And serious wreck. I broke 19 bones at one time, crushed both my femurs, 9 ribs, punctured my lung, both my wrists, my arm. I wound up at the same hospital I worked at for 12 years on a ventilator in ICU, like just holding on, grasping for life. And, you know, it really touched me, thinking I didn't know if I was going to make it out of there. I stayed in a wheelchair one day less of like 6 months, had multiple surgeries. So it really, even more so showed me the patient side of it. I was scared, you know, and it's like you want to be informed of what's going on. I thought my career was over. I thought I was going to lose everything. I really thought I was going to die. And I fought to come back. I'll never forget. I'd show up and work in my wheelchair, you know, and now I can tell from firsthand experience, my nurses that work in critical care or even bedside, I said, listen, inform your patients, let them know what's going on. Don't treat them like a number. That's somebody's brother or grandfather or mother. And I just tried to make the best of the situation, but that's hard for me. And even to this day, I have effects from it. Just thinking about it, I get emotional and physically too. I still hurt. I have titanium rods for both my knees to both my hips and my arms. So I know I would never be able to work anymore as a nurse full time. They wouldn't accept me, and so I'm blessed to say that I do have this now, and it made me work and appreciate it even more. So that was
What was that like? That I mean, I don't want to go too much back to the dark days, but I mean, to be in a position where you're not sure if you're going to make it, and that's a fear that thankfully I've never known. But I'm kind of curious, a couple of things. You know, one, like what got you through that hard period, and then two, how, if at all, did it change your perspective on life and business?
well, what got me through. I'll never forget this one moment that I can pick out. Whenever I was in ICU and I was on the ventilator and my arms were tied, and my wife, I'm with Mindy, the one I told you, the school teacher, and my daughters walked in. They were really young at the time. They were standing up against the wall. They didn't even want to come touch me. They didn't even recognize me. And I said to myself, you know, I said, you know, I'm a Christian, I'm Catholic. And I said, well, God, if you're going to take me, go ahead now. And I felt like, for something, like I said, you know, I just felt like, okay, I'm gonna make it, and I started fighting. Then, well, what kept me through that, got me through that, is my children and my wife, and I just fought. And at that point in time, I quit taking all pain medicine to try to wean myself off the ventilator, because I wasn't able to come off of it with all of the morphine and stuff they were giving me, because it was suppressing my respirations. So, and it was hard with 9 broken ribs. Every time that ventilator would circulate, but I knew I had to come off the ventilator or they were going to trach me. They were going to put a tracheotomy, and I didn't want that either. So I quit taking my pain medication, and they weaned me off the ventilator like 48 hours later.
Whoa.
Yeah,
Wow. That's intense.
yeah, yeah. It was.
How do you view life differently now than you did before the accident?
I definitely appreciate it a lot more. I mean, I appreciate my kids and my family a lot. I say a lot more. It's just I realize how precious life is. I did before being a nurse because I'd see people come in, and they would die young, and then I'd see old people come in and suffer for months and months and months. But now I realize that you only die once, and it can happen at any time, and nobody's. They say, well, you're not promised tomorrow. Well, no, you're not promised today. We don't know we're going to make it through the day at any given time. The body is very resourceful and can get you through a lot of things. And then other things, it doesn't take much. Some type of bacterial infection. I've seen older people die from chickenpox, varicose pneumonia that you would never think. I mean, other people getting major accidents, major trauma, and they pull through. So what is it? I don't know. Life is life. You have to look at it as we're not promised the next day. We're not promised anything. So make the most that you can of each and every day.
Live
And
for
that's
today. Live in this
yes,
moment. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Michael, what's a fun fact that somebody wouldn't know about you? Something interesting.
A fun fact that somebody wouldn't know about me. Well, I'm very, very extroverted and outspoken, and I've never been a shy person in my life, but I really can withdraw. I own some timber property. I love to just go out there and forget about everything and not have anybody around me or speak. I don't know that. I guess people would never think. They always think I'm a sociable. Want to be. A lot of times I just want to be alone and not have. And most people don't judge me. I would never think you would be like that. I said, yeah, I don't. I don't. I have to escape sometimes. That and I mean, I can be a nerd sometimes. I like to collect coins and stuff like that. So,
Like
little
old
things.
US coins or
Well,
something else?
silver coins and different things. I don't collect as much numismatic anymore. I used to, but I like to have perfect coins, 70s. Like
Mm.
if I buy anything, it'll always be perfect in numismatic. Like they grade them from 1 to 70. I always buy. I like to because even though they're uncirculated, untouched, and everything, only one in thousands and thousands are gonna ever come out perfect if it's the first die or the first print. After a while, there will never be rated that. So yeah, I'm a kind of a nerd with that. I'll sit there with my magnifying glass and look at them and stuff. My wife laughs at.
And so do you keep them like in a drawer or safe, or do you have them on
Uh,
display somewhere in a case?
I have them in a safe. I don't keep them. Yeah, and I'll go through them. I got them all cataloged and when I bought them and how much I paid
And so
for
do
them.
you ever
So
take them out to your property and all alone just sit there and look at them with nobody else around and sort of recharge
that's
your batteries?
that's so funny. I sent my business partner a video the other day of my collection, and he's all, "You need help." And I was at my place getting them all in order and everything. Yes, I do. That's so funny. That's ironic you say that. Yeah, I did.
Well, you combine two of your loves there. Like,
Yeah,
I
and I
mean,
mean
even the
that's
most gregarious people, they got to recharge their batteries sometimes. Yeah.
I have to escape. Yes, and that's my escape. And yeah, I love South Louisiana. It's home to me. I love the culture. I love the peacefulness. I mean, I've been all over the United States. I used to have another company, a cell tower business, but that's another day. So I've got to travel a lot around this country, but this is home to me, and I always come back.
Let's see. What's something you wish you could teach your younger self, Michael? Something that's
Not
obvious to you now, maybe wasn't back then.
not to sweat the small things. Keep your eye on the big picture, and continue at your goals. Educate yourself as much as possible on anything that you have a passion for, and use your own judgment. I've always, whenever I was younger, I think the biggest mistake I'd make was listening to other people directly that I kind of looked up to. And now I realize I am that person. And the advice I even give to younger generation: find your passion, work at it as diligent and as hard as you can. Educate yourself, do your due diligence, and make your own decisions. But educate yourself and use examples. But there's no one, there's no best way. There's your best way. So that's, if I could tell my young self that, it would be that: blaze your own trail.
I like that. I'm writing that one down. There's no best way. There's your best way.
Yes.
Mm.
You know,
Yeah,
I
that's
always
deep.
say the same thing. We're all products of our environment and what we're surrounded with. So you're molded, because my background was psychology. And I thought at one time I was going to be a psychologist, but then I went into nursing because I wouldn't have made any money way back then. They didn't pay for the psychological disorders. But we're products of our environment. You either adapt and thrive, and in nature you'll be called out if you don't. So you have to conform. And my biggest thing I always use, and they'll hear me say this around the office all the time, I said, you never fail unless you quit. And I don't quit, I pivot. I'm not going to continue to do the same thing that I'm doing that's not working, because that's insanity, to expect a different result, but I pivot. So I'm going to just continue to, and one of my biggest inspirations and quotes I love is Martin Luther King Jr.'s, if you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. Whatever you do, just keep moving forward and pivot if you need to. So, I don't give up. I won't quit. I'll quit doing the same thing over and over.
You'll pivot.
I'm going to do. That's exactly right.
Yeah, I think words matter, and that's a good example of that. Any specific mentors, books, podcasts, other types of experiences that you want to give a shout out to that have been helpful in sort of molding you and the trajectory of your career?
Well, I like to read and research and stuff. Whenever I was younger, I would read different articles and different things. I've always looked up to successful people. So, I can give you a few examples. I looked up to like the billionaires, like the Microsoft, Gates, and even Trump. I read some of his things, and just to see how businessmen and models and entrepreneurs. So I've always looked up to anybody that's successful in their field. No one thing in particular, but I always aspired to. I always had that entrepreneurial mind and concept, and I've always wanted to work for myself. So no, I won't say anything specific. I read and make, like I say, I read everything I can. I get my hands on, and I'll make my decisions on whether, so that's nothing specific.
Okay. Mike, I just have one more question for you. But before I ask it, I want to do two things. If you're listening today and you like today's content, please hit the like, subscribe, or share button on your favorite podcast app. I also want to let people know the best way to get in touch with you, Mike. What would that be?
Well, they can go to our website at nursesdirect.us, or they can call our direct line, 337-362-4004. And also they can look us up on Facebook at Nurses Direct. So multiple ways. That'd be the best way to get in touch with us.
Great. Last question for you, Mike. How do you see your industry evolving in the next 5 years? What do you think the big changes are that are coming?
Well, I think we're going to have to see what AI is going to do to this industry technology-wise, how medicine may advance. We don't know. It's always, medicine's always on the cutting edge of technology. So we don't know what cures or what things can happen. As far as for the nurse staffing, I see it always still being a very, very, very high demand. Like I said, because of the burnout rates, I'm just hoping we can perfect the model more to at least utilize the staff and the availability that we have now to the best of their potential. So in the next 5 years, it's hard to see what changes go. I've been doing it for 25 years, and there's changes, but there's not acute and drastic changes. COVID, or whenever a hurricane hits us, it's acute and drastic for me, because I went through Rita, Katrina, and it was, let me tell you, that I could compare that to COVID. It was worse for a short period of time. COVID was just longer.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
And those hurricanes are bad for you because there's so much trauma that needs dealt with, and there's so many people displaced. Some of those people that are displaced are the nurses that you want to get there to help these folks.
Yeah, and the patients. They evacuated all of New Orleans and sent them to North Louisiana and Arkansas, and they, it was, yes, it's chaos. It's like herding cats. And then the nurses scatter. They all have to look out for themselves, their family, and everything. So yeah, it's a hurricane really is it's an acute, drastic change for us, and we have to prepare because I have a lot of nurses in Louisiana.
But in terms of changes to the nurse staffing model, maybe AI is going to have some impact on how you recruit folks and how medical care is delivered. Is that kind of where your thought is?
Yeah, and I'm excited. I'm really excited about it, to be able to better piece together all pieces of the puzzles to be able to recruit nurses better. And I don't like using this word, but profile nurses' tendencies, where they want to work, each individual nurse. Because like I say, my motto, I go back to one nurse at a time. I like to develop that relationship, have that basis and that foundation with them. Because if you spend the time in the beginning, it's going to last for a longevity, a long, long time. If you try to cut corners and they see through it. If you care, they'll know. They know you care. And I do. I legitimately care about my employee. Like I said, I can't have. There's only 168 hours in a week, so I'm not physically capable of doing that. But every opportunity that I have, if I have to put out a fire, I'll do it. And they know, all my staff knows. Call you. We need you to call them, and I do. I will, because that's what got me here. I'm not going to change. I'm not going to change what's working.
Michael, I want to be the first to thank you for sharing both your time and your story with us today. I really appreciate it.
Well, I enjoyed this also. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Folks, that's a wrap on another episode of the Inspired Stories podcast. Thanks for learning with us today.